Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Matt Report podcast. This is a special episode, Matt Report, exclusive piece of content produced by Keith Devon, who's putting out the new PricingWP podcast, which you can find at pricingwp.highrise.digital. That is the URL, so pricingwp.highrise.digital. You can see his agency at highrise.digital. But Keith is putting out this new podcast. It's all about pricing projects around the WordPress space, freelancing, consulting, small agency, big agency. In today's episode, he interviews Elliot Taylor, and they're really diving into the mindset of pricing and why you price projects the way you do. And it's not just about a sustainable business, but it's about a sustainable, and I hate to say it, a sustainable lifestyle. One of the overlooked parts of this conversation, I would say, is how Elliot approaches work. And one of the things he even mentioned was, I need to price to work a limited amount of days during the week so I can spend those other days promoting myself and finding new businesses. And I think a lot of consultants, myself included, guilty as charged, overlook the fact that when you get into business for yourself as a freelancer, it's an amazing opportunity that you can do it. But we forget that we also have to find new business. It's not going to come while we're working on projects for customers, 5 days a week, 6 days a week. You have to spend some time promoting and building out that portfolio and those messages and pieces of content, heck, even podcasts. And you got to find time to do it. So I really love this really in-depth conversation, and I applaud Elliot for being so open to talk about the struggles and the good parts of freelancing and building a business in the WordPress space. It's mattreport.com, mattreport.com/subscribe to join the mailing list. Let's dive right into that episode.
This show is all about pricing, and I've got a lot of questions for you about pricing. So let's get into that. Let's say a prospect reaches out to you, they've landed on your website, they've seen what you do, they've filled out your contact form. How do you take that prospect from that point to giving them a price for the work that you're going to do?
Well, it starts at the contact form where I take in a few more details than I did when I first started. I asked them their timeframes, I asked them what their budgets are. And alongside that, it's a conditional form. So if they say on budget, I don't know, I then display a blog post that I've written, which helps them sort of price their project, helps them create a specification, and sort of guides them through the process of how to start thinking about their project in terms of how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost and what budget they have.
Can you give a bit of an overview as to what that content is in terms of how a client should start thinking about their budget?
Yeah, so I wheel out the car analogy, and I think that is the most overused analogy when we talk about pricing websites and pricing products, but it works very well. You can spend a lot of money on a car. You can what was that classic MTV 90s program, Pimp Your Ride? You can pimp up your website as you desire. You can bid on new shiny rims, or you can just buy a banger and make it go, because all you need to do is get from A to B. It really depends on sort of your requirements. So budget is a very flexible thing, and you can get sort of snarky freelancers who will sort of quote silly figures because they're trying to make a point that the project is as much as you want it to cost. So I sort of I try and sort of illustrate that budgets aren't as static as you might think, and it really depends on what you need. If you say I need an e-commerce website and my budget is only a couple of grand, then rather than try and shoehorn a bespoke WooCommerce or Magento project into what they need, because that's what the skill I have in this example, I might say, look, for that budget, and that doesn't even include, you haven't even considered design, you might actually prefer a sort of a SaaS offering like Shopify or Prestocard or some alternative. So that's the sort of conversation I try and have about opening up about budget. it is quite a hard conversation to have because people are skeptical, I'm not sure if that's the right word, or just wary about revealing their cards, revealing what money they have at their disposal. But the more professional somebody is, the more experienced they are, the less of a hurdle it is. These are often problems that you have with inexperienced, low-cost projects.
And if someone pushes back, so say you're in a conversation about budget, like on the phone. I know you've done some pre-qualification, but I'm sure you still have to occasionally talk about it. And they push back on maybe why you're asking, and they give those reasons. For example, if I tell you my budget, I'm sure no one's actually ever said this, but this is what they're thinking. Like you said, if I tell you my budget, you're just going to charge that full amount. What would you say to a client about why it's important?
I would say it's about building a trusting relationship, and that it's a tricky conversation to have. I'm not going to pretend it's not. Like I've got the perfect answer for it. But I would say that if you want to build a long-term relationship with your developer, you want to build something that's sustainable and ongoing, then you need to be able to break these projects down into how many days they're going to be and how much they're going to cost. I often say that the last thing you want me to do as a developer is to set a fixed price and sort of naively try and attempt to complete this project. So they say, well, I'll build your website for $2,000. And I sort of jump in thinking, oh, it's fantastic. It's the sort of thing I did when I started. I would then overstretch myself and it would take, say, a week longer than I'd estimated. I'd then stop making any profit. My margins would be completely decimated. I might even start making a loss on the project. And as a consequence, I won't be able to focus on that project because I need to pay the bills. So I'm going to have to bring in other work. And that sort of gets deprioritized. So I would try and illustrate that the importance of getting your budgets correct and your timeframes correct feeds all the way back to the client. They want a developer who is earning their keep and is successful so that they can reinvest their time back into the project and not deliver subpar results. So I think having that kind of honest conversation can be quite a healthy starting point to working out budgets, even if they are quite elusive at the very early stages.
So if someone does give you a budget in that contact form, and then you start having a conversation around requirements, and it's obvious that their requirements or their budget doesn't match their requirements, how often do you think you can convince a client to actually raise their budget?
Well, oftentimes I'd suggest a discovery process or a consultancy session. So I would say, look, you're not at the stage to commit to building this project yet. You're actually at an earlier stage. You're trying to work out your timeframes and your budgets and your requirements. Really, you need to build a specification. How about we sit down, get a meeting room for half a day, and thrash it out? And that document you can then use to either work with me if we decide that there's scope for that, or you can use it to build a relationship with some other developers. And I'm even happy enough to sort of make recommendations within the local community or online if it's applicable.
Yeah. So would that be a paid for service?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in paying for discovery sessions. I won't lie, I get emails often from clients who have included a free discovery brief, like a specification that is sort of on a PDF from a different agency or a different freelancer. And it makes me squirm because I think, these poor sods have spent, 4 or 5 hours digging deep into this project, and then it's just been sort of forwarded round to a dozen different freelancers and agencies to try and sort of fish for the best cost. So I'm quite reluctant of doing discovery sessions. I don't think, for free. I don't think it sets the tone for the ongoing relationship because it devalues your time, and and it also could just undermine you because they could just use that and go somewhere else.
Absolutely. I find that discovery work is sometimes the highest value work you'll ever do for a client. So it's I think it's worth charging for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are consultants that work on a value-based pricing system where they don't bill like a fixed hourly rate. They'll say, okay, this project, this is a 50 grand project, and I'm going to do a set consultancy bit of work to try and work out what's the best way to initiate the project. Perhaps it's a migration, going to a new platform. So they'll work out their pricing based on the value of that they're going to provide in sort of getting the ball moving and sort of starting in a strong foundation.
Yeah.
So that's one angle that a lot of sort of discovery consultants will take in pricing their own value.
The client has come to you, you've got their budget, you've got their requirements, everything looks okay in that regard. What next? How do you get to a final quote or proposal?
Well, I guess I'm a little bit different to a lot of other sort of agencies, freelancers, boutique agencies, however you want to describe them, but other people in my space, in as much as I'm a big proponent of giving estimates for days and then keeping the client updated on progress as it goes along, because there are just so many variables involved when you're building projects, so many unknown unknowns, that if you want to have that transparent, honest relationship, you have to be quite flexible with how long projects are going to take. So I would say I estimate this is a 10-day project, and then I would, as you dig into the project, get a clearer idea of how that project's progressing, if I'm going to be under or over the initial estimate. So that kind of method, that kind of way of working suits some clients but doesn't suit other clients. A lot of clients will want very fixed, sort of, I want to know I'm going to get everything done for this set price, and oftentimes they're not the best fit for how I work, but other clients prefer it.
Do you basically turn down fixed cost work? You never do it. You'll always try to go down a time and materials route, and if the client comes with you, that's great, and if they don't, then they're not the right fit. Yeah, pretty much.
I'll explain my day rate, and I will give an estimate for the project. And what I want to avoid is scope creep, which is inevitably a huge part of any project. And also devaluing of my time. So if I say, if I do a fixed price and then suddenly a load of new requirements get pushed into it and such like, then if it's fixed price, you feel very obliged to sort of keep the client happy and fulfill this ever expanding brief. And I think it's quite a dangerous approach. So I try and sort of keep the communication constant. So even after a day or two, if the exploration of sort of digging into this code has revealed something else. I mean, the classic thing would be you're working on somebody else's code base and you discover a right clanger in amongst it all that you wouldn't have been able to find unless you started sort of looking under the bonnet. Then as soon as you see that, as soon as you've made a new appraisal of how long this is going to take, communicate and reassess with the client, say, look, I found, just as you would with a car. And I do wheel out the car analogy a lot, but sort of, you take your car in for a service and they say, we found some brake cabling is perished, and I'm afraid to say that's going to be another 5 hours work. So yeah, I'm reluctant to do the fixed prices on just as you wouldn't expect your mechanic to say, I'm going to fix it all for a fixed price.
Yeah. Are there any major drawbacks of that model, the time and materials model, in your experience?
Yeah, you're saying no to a lot of work. So there's a drawback, but I have found that the high quality work isn't affected by that. So it's a filter, and it works well for me. But for all I know, the thing with freelancing is I could just be on a lucky streak for the last 5 years or so. So I'm reluctant to get too cocky about it, because I'm sure if I have a 3-month drought of work, then I will crawl back to taking the fixed price.
The interesting thing for me about the time and materials model, or one of the factors when it comes to deciding on a pricing model, is the balance of risk. And in the time and materials model, it appears that most of the risk is with the client. So how do you go about managing that, and keeping, I guess, potentially taking on some of the risk yourself if you do, or just making sure that you reduce the risk as much as possible?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. It's all about risk, and I want to minimize my risk. I was the other day, this is somewhat related, is that another developer in my co-working space was telling me how he's taking a short-term loan because one of their clients was unable to pay them. He doesn't want to take them to this is a bit of a tangent, I do apologize. Doesn't want to take them to the small claims court because he wants the ongoing work, because he believes there's a rich seam of work coming their way, but they haven't been able to get the funding they required to pay him, so he's taking on a loan. And it made me shiver, to be honest, to think that this guy is become a bank. Well, not only has he got the lack of earnings, but he's taking on this, this loan to try and fill the gap, to subsidize this potential work. And I think this is a road that you can go down if you're not careful with, in many respects, whether it's just finding clients who can't pay the bills or can't pay on time, or or if you're taking on risk in as much as, I'm going to guess it's going to be a project that takes this long, and I might come up trumps. I might have to sort of pay the risk in an extra 5 to 10 days work. Depends on your risk. What would they call it? Your risk
risk profile.
Risk profile. Yeah, I guess if you want to go down that way, I try to minimize it. I think having had a number of painful experiences early on in my freelance career, I decided that it was better to be transparent about the risk and say and to the client and say, look, this is the risk. The risk is it's going to be about 8 days to 15 days. This is where I feel it is going to be. I think it's going to be 8 to 10 days, but I will let you know as I go along. And after a couple of days, I'll have a much better idea. And I think that sort of that transparency and lack of awkwardness about risk is really refreshing to some clients, but not to everyone, as I said earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two parts to, I guess, putting together a price that's based on time and materials. There is the amount of time it will take and the rate that you've set. So let's dig into each of those separately. So in terms of the time, whenever you're putting together an estimate, so I guess in the time and materials model, it is an estimate. It's not a fixed quote. How do you go about coming up with an estimate for a project, a time estimate?
That's a tricky one, but it comes down to experience. Sometimes you're making estimates on big unknowns. So the designs might not have been completed at this point. So you really have no idea what you're getting yourself in for. But you can say, okay, in my experience, it's going to take anything from half a day to a couple of days to build a design for a page, assuming some level of interactivity and responsivity for points. Or if you're building an API design, and I recently had to do an API integration with Meetup, so I could scan through the documentation, see they had a quite robust RESTful API, look into how OAuth worked. I've done OAuth a few times, so I know it's going to be about so many hours to do that, and you sort of break it up into bits. It's not rocket science, but a lot of it comes down to experience.
We do something similar. So we try to just break the project down into the smallest parts that we can, and we estimate, or just based on experience, how long that might take. So we try to get as granular as possible. Obviously, there's got to be a limit to that, or it's not that useful and just takes too long. But we do something similar. So once you've done that, do you ever show that to a client, or do you show them the total? So do you say this feature and this feature and this feature line item by line item, or is it just I estimate that the total project is going to cost X?
Well, I do the itemization of how long each element is going to take myself, and I do share that with clients. Some have got to a stage where they don't need to see that level of detail. Others do want to see it. Normally, for each itemized element, I'll do a sort of a range. I've worked with some agencies who use story points in Jira, and I thought that worked quite well. They sort of divorced the idea of this being a time estimate, and it's more of a sort of hardness estimate, like how much effort is going to be involved. That's quite nice, but also I think when you're working directly with clients, they prefer to sort of work in time estimates.
I know someone explained that kind of story-based or effort-based model to me once, and I just didn't get it. So I was like, how are my clients going to understand this if I can't?
Well, I've worked with someone else, which I quite like this one, is that they had in their project management tool, they had an exponential sort of option of hardness. So it sort of, you didn't have to be sort of stuck with just incrementing sort of in a linear way. You could say this is extraordinarily hard on tickets. But essentially it's just different measurements of, how long it's going to take.
Yeah. So the other part of the price is going to be your rate. So do you work on a hourly rate, a daily rate? How do you kind of split up your time?
I work on a daily rate. And I'm just going to open. You might have to edit this little bit of jibber jabber out. But I'm just going to open a blog post I wrote a couple of years ago. Oh, okay, maybe you know it better than me because I haven't read it for a few years. But I asked 100 freelancers. I did a talk at WordCamp Bristol, and in preparation for it, I asked 100 freelancers how they measure their time. How do they track their time, and how do they how does that translate to going to clients? And I naively thought that everyone would be doing it by hour or by day. And I was quite surprised at how people broke down their time, actually.
Yeah.
I'm just going to scroll down and see if I can actually find the stats.
There was people, I remember reading it, and someone billed in 6-minute increments or something like that.
I know, that was my favorite one, 6-minute increments, because you could then multiply it by 10. I would never, it's amazing how other people work. There are 20% of people billed in 15-minute increments.
Okay.
26% hourly.
Yeah.
And then you've got 9% half days, 13% 30 minutes, and it goes right granular, all down to a £50 minimum charge. Somebody charges 5% every minute. And then 1.3 actually said they were mostly fixed rate. So yes, it turns out there's a huge diversity in different pricing methods, at least in the Brighton area. So that's obviously not representative of it being national or global, but from a small sort of pocket of freelancers here, it was just very diverse.
So that's like how they, I guess, measure their time or bill their time.
Billing time. That was the way they billed it. Yeah,
that's the way they bill it. But I guess everybody there probably has an hourly or daily rate that they, if they're doing time and materials or kind of time-based pricing, they'll have an hourly or daily rate that they reveal to a potential client. And I wonder how you've gone about setting your rate, and if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm a lazy person, so I try and do everything in a simple way, which is in half day or a day, basically. So just that's how I try and break things down. I would rather take on bigger projects, and I know people work different way and people have different approaches. I know lots of people who are very successful and they take on lots and lots of little items, and that's what they like. For me personally, I find that there is a there is like an activation energy. There's a lot of work just to get into the headspace of being into a project. So I need to maybe set up the instance on my local dev environment. I'll need to do a bunch of non-billable work with invoicing and such like. So I'm reluctant to take on multiple small projects, sort of things that will take half an hour, a few hours. I would rather take on a chunky project. So I gravitate towards charging by half day and by day for my projects.
I don't know what your daily rate is, and I mean you can reveal it if you're comfortable with. You don't have to at all. But how did you come up with that price per day for yourself?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you what we're working with. So when you're a freelancer and a contractor and anyone who's in the development space, self-employed, you're selling your time. And there are 260 weekdays in a year, 8 bank holidays, and they're included in your 28-day minimum holiday allowance. So essentially, you have 19.3 billable days per month. So that's what we're selling. And I don't think many people want to work all those days because you've got sort of non-billable time, such as doing your invoicing and working on your bookkeeping and doing your marketing and your self-promotion. So say you're working 75% capacity, that's 174 days a year or 14 and a half billable days per month. And I think that is a really good starting point to start thinking about what your day rate should be. So if you've got 14 and a half billable days, plug that into a calculator against what you want your net income to be, what you take home, and you can start thinking in terms of how much you should be charging.
Okay.
So I did the sums and I looked at the different sort of percentage capacity, I guess, as I like to think about it. So do I want to work 10 days a month or 14 and a half days a month, at that 75% capacity? What do I like to work, and what can I charge that gets me the same net income? I did a good spreadsheet about this, which I'm sure you can share in the show notes if you want.
Will do.
And I came to the conclusion that it was better to charge more and expect less days. So say I would charge a rate where I could work 10 days a month, and then if I can fill up the additional days, then there's a sort of a magnifier effect on those days, because my outgoings as a freelancer are pretty static. Every time I earn more, that those days are more valuable than the first days, which sort of have to be offset against the expenses and outgoings. So that was my approach, and it's sometimes it's a bit scary when your day rate's a bit higher because you're saying no to lots of work, but it means that you can reinvest that time into your marketing, into your self-promotion. You can do talks at WordCamps or at conferences and such like, which help give you the exposure that you need to fill those days up.
Absolutely. And I think a thing a lot of freelancers don't think about is the P word, profit. I think they think about their salary and that's it. But at the end of the day, unless you're putting a good pension aside or building up some wealth kind of on the side in a different way, the day you stop is the day the money disappears. And if you're kind of factoring profit into it as well, then that can help you think in a more business-minded way.
I totally agree. It's a cliche, but I will repeat it just in case somebody's not had the misfortune of hearing it. But they say profit is sanity, revenue is vanity. And it is very tempting to get sort of, drawn towards the high revenue. But if it's not resulting in a good net income, then it's not worth it.
I remember looking at our revenue the first, I think maybe the second year of High Rise Digital, and I thought, wow, that's a big number. And then you look at the profit and you're like, oh no, it's not. It's like, that doesn't really mean anything. There's a lot of expenses, and there were some staff costs and things that were all to come out of that, tax to come out of that and everything. Yeah. And when you look at it, basically we've paid ourselves a modest salary, and we've got a little bit in the bank. So those big numbers mean nothing, really. So yeah, it purely is vanity. I totally agree with that. You mentioned, you talked about capacity. I found that interesting because this is something I always wrestle with and struggle with a little bit, is knowing really how much billable time we should be putting in, as opposed to other. You mentioned a lot of other things like giving WordCamp talks, writing blog posts, doing your marketing, all that kind of stuff. You seem to be a guy that likes to measure things and think about these things. Do you have a good feel for how much billable time you put into as a percentage of your workday?
Yes, totally. So I've got some more numbers. If anyone out there likes numbers, they'll be happy with this bit. So if I'm working at 96% capacity, that's 18 days. And if I work 18 days at £300 day rate, my net income is just about 42k. If I work at 48% capacity, which is 9 days, which is half as much, and my day rate is £600, so double my day rate, I have the same take home. I have the same net income of about 42k. So I always find that those figures are quite nice ones to hold in my head. Do I want to work 9 days a month at £600 day rate, or do I want to work basically full capacity every day at 300? Well, we know that working every day at 300 is going to be a bit of a stretch because, there's going to be no time for doing your promotional activities to bring in the new work. So getting a balance, I think, somewhere between that, and these day rates aren't by any means like 300 and 600, I think are pretty standard within the UK sort of development space. But you don't have to sort of see that as a ceiling or a bottom limit. But there's a good sort of frame to think about. And if you do work full capacity, then there's this classic quote from the book called The E-Myth, which says you want to be working on your business, not in your business. So if you are at full capacity, you are just working in your business as a cog in the system, and you won't have time to grow your business, to think about it. Or if you do, you do it in the after hours and the weekend, and we all know that that's a fast road down to burnout and job dissatisfaction.
Yeah. So have you found a sweet spot in terms of the balance between on the business and in the business?
Well, I try to. I think I try to. I mean, we all are susceptible to filling our days up when there's opportunity to work. But I try to get a balance. I try to work about 15 days a month, with the other days working on self-promotion and building my own projects and doing other elements which feed into growing the business.
I loved it when I read that blog post of yours. I'd actually done some similar calculations myself, I guess, as most freelancers do when they realize they need to take money a bit more seriously. And at the time, this was a good few years ago now, and I can't remember exactly what I was charging, but I worked out that as a London-based freelancer, you really needed to be charging at least £50 an hour to make a half decent living when everything was included, and capacity and tax and all that kind of stuff was baked in. And at that time, that felt like an awful lot of money to me, and I know that for a lot of other people were charging an awful lot less. So I found that interesting. That for me was almost like the break-even bare minimum, and it was quite a high number.
It's so tricky, isn't it, being a WordPress? I'm just going to talk about WordPress because I'm in that space, and I know you are as well.
Yeah.
But this applies across the board, in whether a designer or you work in developing other languages. But there is a lot of competition from the lower costs of. I don't know how to put it really. There's other people out there just charging a lot less, and it's easy to be swayed by that and value yourself based on how much other people are valuing themselves. But it's a race to the bottom, and also a lot of people who are out there selling their wares may not have the same skill set as you. So I would try and ignore that. £50 an hour is £400 day rate, which is low for London. In any other in any other programming language, seeing React developers are getting £500 to £700 a day. Your agencies are charging themselves out in London £800 to £1,200 a day.
Yeah.
So you start sort of seeing how your rate compares to the wider ecosystem, and try and price yourself on the value that you provide, rather than sort of how the lower rungs are priced.
You hinted there that the WordPress industry maybe values itself, or is valued by the market, lower than other languages or potentially other frameworks. Why do you think that might be?
100% think that, and I suspect that would be a whole podcast episode on why WordPress ecosystem undervalues itself. It could be everything from the volunteerism and the amateurism, which is a huge element of our ecosystem community. It could be because of the low pricing that we see in plugins that sort of set the expectations for development. I sell a plugin on Code Canyon for 15 quid, and the amount of requests I get for the sort of minor customizations, or can you create basically like a page builder functionality for this tiny little plugin, and I ask the budget, and they think, oh, I'll pay another 20 quid, and that's the expectations out there. Could be that our users are more familiar with paying £2 or £3 for apps on the iOS App Store, or could be. Yeah. I'm sure there's lots of reasons, but whatever the reasons, it's definitely a undervalued ecosystem.
You just led very nicely into a listener question, which I was going to do at the end, but Vishal Kathari tweeted earlier saying, from the perspective of a plugin development company, how do you set your hourly rates for customizations that customers request for your plugins?
I saw this tweet, and I said it was a hard question at the time, because it is a hard one. Honestly, I just say no. I mean, that is the honest truth. I don't know how you set prices for jobs like that, because they're hard and they're bitty, and it depends on the plugin. I've decided to go for bigger fish in my line of work, and as a consequence, I say no a lot, and that'd be the sort of project I'd say no to.
Yeah.
That's not a very useful answer for fish, but they're often very bitty, and editing plugins is a nightmare, because you don't have child themes like we do. You don't have a child plugin, so you've got to start editing core code, and or hope that there's filters that you can sort of work with the plugin, but that's not always the case. And then if you do edits to the core of the plugin, which is seriously bad practice, but if you have to, then you've got to sort of educate the client that this is going to need ongoing upkeep and such like. So
yeah,
tricky. There's not really an easy answer there, so no. I avoid it.
Yeah, fair enough. We sell some plugins ourselves, and we often get similar requests, and I think it's probably the nature of the plugin actually that we do take on customization, and we find it to be potentially very profitable, because, and we can come to value-based pricing in a minute, but we are the world experts in that plugin. There is no one better for that job. So if you're going to set a daily rate for working on your own plugin, that's the time to experiment with higher rates, in my opinion, because you're the go-to person. You've got the experience, and that experience is valuable, and that's value should come into your price. So maybe it's worth experimenting with a slightly higher rate, or maybe like if it's a small enough bit of work, maybe a bit of value-based pricing, which leads us on very nicely to value-based pricing. Do you have any experience with it? Do you have any particular thoughts on it?
I think it's fantastic if you can make it work. And niching down into a specific plugin, product, or area of expertise is the fast way to sort of being able to implement value-based pricing. I use value-based pricing for more my consultancy work, less of my development work. And I think it comes back down to when you're doing value-based pricing, you're still selling your time. So you'll be giving it a much larger multiplier effect, but you're still coming down to how many days you're selling. So for me, I look back at my graph. Remember earlier we talked about working at 48% capacity, which is 9 days, or working at 18 days, which is basically full. Now, if I'm going to be working less days at higher rates, which is essentially what value-based pricing is, can I absorb that risk? Can I absorb the ability of not finding those clients that might pay significantly more? Now, for me, I try and get a blend. I try and get a mix of my dev work, and I also sell consultancy at a different rate. That'd be sort of a value based depending on the project. So I sort of mitigate that risk. There are people who do it just value based, and they're highly successful. And I think that is a good sort of endpoint or a good focus point for a lot of freelancers if they can sort of expand their expertise to allow that to be the case.
Absolutely. It's something that I've been reading about and struggling with for a very long time. Whenever I listen to the value-based pricing experts and read the blog posts, etc., I'm totally taken in by it. I'm like, yes, this is it. This is the holy grail. I can totally see why this works for both the client and the vendor, but I just can't make it work in reality. There's just some big roadblocks. I've actually got a value-based pricing expert coming up. I'm going to be interviewing him next week, so I'm going to put lots of hard questions to him and try to solve my own problems and solve everyone else's value-based pricing problems at the same time.
I'm going to say another cliche, but in the product world, we always say treat everything like a product. And I think sometimes when you're selling your services, you're selling your time, it's good to think about it as a product. And do you have product market fit? Are you selling something that is in demand that can solve a specific market? And if you do, then you can have quite good success with it. But if you're too generic and you don't have that niche, you don't have that specific expertise, then I think you'll struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. There was something you said earlier about, I think, a kind of fixed kind of ceiling on your income as a freelancer if you're working on purely time-based billing, because the market kind of sets that upper limit for you. I guess there's only so much that a React developer in London can actually charge, or maybe not these days, but let's say WordPress. Let's bring it back to WordPress. There's only so much that a WordPress developer in London can really charge. So there's a kind of fixed ceiling on your income. Have you taken any steps to break out of that?
Yes, I mean if you're working at a top day rate of say £600 a day, and you've got your 18 days a month that you're working, your take-home income is 79k, which is not to be sniffed at, but that's the ceiling. You can increase your day rate, but you can't increase your days. So I work in the product space anyway, so I've been building my own products that solve problems that I have. And by building sort of more scalable business models, with SaaS, which is where I've been focusing on, I hope I can build a more, just a more scalable business that doesn't have the same ceiling that selling time does. I mean, if I can be so cheeky as in to even just mention what I've built, because it's somewhat relevant.
Please do.
It's called Simple Hours, and it calculates your freelancer income. It's basically it's not very clever. It's just a calculator and a calendar mixed together. So you schedule your days that you're working for different clients. You set your day rate, and it will tell you how much that client is taking home that month. Yep. Tell you how many days free you have left to fill. If you do fixed price projects, it works the same way, and it will sort of give you an idea of your day rate. And if you add more days, so say I've said this project's going to be 10 days, I'm going to sell it for $3,000. Every time you add another day, it will recalculate your day rate. So it's it's a tool that I use every day as a freelancer.
What's the website?
Simplehours.com.
Okay, I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. So that is let's talk about pricing for simplehours.com. How do you price that? Well,
I'm at early stages of just trying to get traction with the product. So I have I can quite easily veer out of the answer here by saying I haven't decided on pricing for it. I'm interested in getting the traction and the interest from the community, and then use that to gauge how to price it.
Yeah.
There's a great talk I heard about hypergrowth, but with the founder of LinkedIn, who said they were still sort of years into the product before they worked out how they were going to monetize it. They just wanted to sort of get some traction and build the community first. So I feel that's where I am with pricing that.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I'm definitely going to check that out. That sounds really interesting. And something that I've actually thought of as I've been talking to you today is I think we should look more at our billing or managing our time in bigger chunks, because we have quite a few projects on at any one time. We've got a handful of retainer clients and then usually a handful of projects all at the same time. And our days tend to just be so bitty. So you could touch 5 different projects or more in a day. And like you mentioned earlier, the kind of cognitive switching that goes on between those and just the kind of administration of it all just means that actually our workday is probably highly reduced and much, much less efficient than if we were blocking out bigger chunks of time for a client. So maybe we go forward and say, on Monday we do half an hour for this retainer client, and on Wednesday we do a full day for this retainer client, and work that way instead of just trying to fit things in as and when. I think that could actually make us a lot more efficient, and a tool like Simple Hours looks like it could really help with that.
Yeah, I mean, some agencies manage it by having whole departments that just do the bitty things. And I think that's a good business model. So you have your core team building out projects on larger areas, and then you have teams that just do the smaller items. And because they're sort of optimized for that, they can do them well. But I totally agree. It's very tricky to switch between multiple projects. You only have so much bandwidth, and there's a time cost to that. And when there's a time cost, there's an actual cost.
Yeah, because we use tools like we were using Toggle. We've recently switched to Harvest, and it does mean that you stop the clock on one task, and then you jump into your inbox or your project management software, look around for what you should be doing next. It takes a few minutes, and all that time you're not charging, and that time really does build up over the course of a day, a week, a month, a year. Whereas if you were focused just on maybe one thing on a day, then you wouldn't have any of that switching. So yeah, something to think about for sure. I've got just a few more questions. We're getting towards the end. This has been a superb conversation. We're approaching, I think, 50 minutes so far.
Your editor will have fun with this.
I don't want to edit any of it. I think it's been a great conversation. I've certainly got a lot from it. I think I could talk to you for hours on this stuff. But a few final questions. Are you happy with the pricing decisions that you've made? Have they given you the business and the lifestyle that you wanted?
Yes, I think the only caveat to that is, a little bit of a frustration of the value in the WordPress community. And I think also, so I mean that's why I've branched out into Laravel, not only from the Laravel and Vue and React, not only because I find that there are good challenges as a developer, but I think the opportunities are greater. If you're in the WordPress community, I think there is huge opportunities of specializing in React. I know that there are a lot of agencies out there, plugin developers as well, looking for contractors on ongoing jobs to build Guten this and Guten that. So there is still opportunity in the WordPress world, but it's a little bit frustrating.
Yeah. If you could give listeners just one piece of pricing advice, what would that be?
Increase your rates. It's such a cliche, isn't it? Increase your rates. But I mean, I was told that when I was starting out, and I thought, well, that's all very well, but I've got to find the work that will give me that rate. But if you can increase your rates and work less, and then spend the other time chasing the larger jobs, then that can pay dividends. It is a bit of a risk to start with, but it's better to catch a big whale than get a whole net of little fish, in my experience.
Yeah. An interesting little story from my early freelancing career was I was having a meeting with a prospective client, and he told me during that meeting that he nearly didn't get in touch with me because I was too cheap.
Yeah, I mean that's the worst thing you want to hear, but it's very true. Think about how much other people are charging, and other companies are charging. As soon as you get into your mind that there are WordPress agencies out there charging £800 to £1,500 a day, then you can use that to calibrate your worth. In some respects, working with a freelancer is a much nicer experience for certain clients because there's less bulk as well as the price point. You're not just selling on price. There's other elements involved to hiring freelancers and contractors.
Yeah, I think that it's really easy to think as a freelancer or a small team that all the clients want to work with the big agencies, but actually they don't. We recently surveyed our clients, and most of them came back and said that the size of our business was one of the reasons why they love working with us, because we're small and they're always dealing with the same people. They're dealing directly with the people that they're doing the work, and instead of a long line of interchangeable project and account managers. So yeah, I think that there's absolutely value in being small. So I don't think we need to keep our prices low just because we're not a 50-person agency.
And the final thing I would say on the sort of the pricing is it's very hard to price yourself if you're doing everything. So if somebody comes to you with a project and you're going to take on the entirety of the project as a freelancer, it can be very hard because you need to specialize on development, or you need to specialize on the design or the copywriting. So I would say work in collaboration with other freelancers has been a major breakthrough for me. Often I synchronize our day rates together so it's easy for the client, but then we bill separately to the client. I don't try and wrap it up as being sort of a single agency model. We're just fully transparent with the client, say, look, we're 3 freelancers, this is our day rates, we all have a similar expertise, and we work well together, and that's really opened a lot of doors.
Elliot, it has been fantastic to speak to you today. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Just one last thing, where can people find you and contact you?
You can tweet me at raisinco, or go to my website, which is https://raisin.co, or you can give Simple Hours a go at simplehours.com.